All right, so if you clicked on this video, then you probably hate your job to some degree, which is a tough situation to be in because we need to work, right? You gotta work to make money. And it's really more like half of your life when you're in your prime working years, where you're working Monday through Friday and maybe sometimes on weekends. There is a lot of time that we spend either working or thinking about work or commuting to work. And based on polls that I've done with my audience, a lot of people have this feeling of like, man, I'm spending all these hours related to work and I just don't really enjoy the thing that I'm doing. Now, in that situation, the internet will feed us broadly two different options. Option number one is you've just got to suffer. It's called work for a reason. Work is not supposed to be enjoyable. It's just capitalism. It's just government. It's a system. There's nothing you can do about it. So you might as well just sort of grin and bear it. And then option number two that is often peddled by online influencer type people, including me in fairness, is that, hey, if you don't like your job, it's an option to start your own business. You can strike out on your own and build your own business and you'd have fun, freedom, flexibility, financial abundance. But the honest truth is that while I do think the entrepreneurship path is good for a lot of people, it is actually not for everyone. And there is a third option, which is what we're going to talk about in this video. Now, if you're new here, hello, my name is Ali, and I used to be a doctor where I didn't particularly enjoy my job. I enjoyed aspects of it, but like broadly didn't quite enjoy it. And so at the time, while I was working as a doctor, I did a bunch of research into trying to figure out, okay, what are the things I can do to make this a lot more fun? I put a bunch of those insights into my New York Times bestselling book, Feel Good Productivity. And through applying those various insights and getting to a point where I didn't quite hate my job, I eventually built a business that allowed me to quit the job. And I've been making YouTube videos here since 2017, sharing the strategies, tools, books, ideas, and stuff that can help us build a life that we love. And so we are going to break this video down into 4 parts. Firstly, we're going to look at some of the factors that drive job satisfaction as a sort of top level overview. And then we're going to dive into the 3 different paths that you can follow if currently you hate your job. So let's get into it. Understanding job satisfaction. Okay, so what actually makes people enjoy their jobs? Is it the salary? Is it the perks? Is it the office environment? Well, a bunch of research shows that those things are important, but there are also much deeper factors that are at play. Now, there is a wonderful book by Daniel Pink called Drive that looks at what are the factors that drive intrinsic motivation. So in a work context, it's where you actually want to be doing the job. You're not just doing it for the money. And broadly, Dan Pink tells us that this comes down to 3 key things. The first one is autonomy, which is the freedom to decide how you do your work. Secondly, we have mastery, where you are learning and getting better at the thing. And thirdly, we have purpose, which is the sense that what you do has some kind of meaningful impact on other people. So we are striving for autonomy, mastery, and purpose, but the catch is that you don't often get all of those things from day one by default. And this is where we can cite another book. This is So Good They Can't Ignore You from Cal Newport. And this book basically dismantles the idea that like follow your passion is how you find a career that you love. Instead, what Cal Newport argues in the book is that if you want these elements of autonomy and mastery in particular in your job, then the way you do that is you become really good at the thing, even if you're not passionate about the thing. And by virtue of becoming good at it, you've got the mastery component, which drives intrinsic motivation. But also by virtue of you becoming really good at the thing, you become way more valuable. You develop what he calls career capital. You are then able to cash in that career capital to get things like autonomy and flexibility. So this is kind of what we're trying to go for. If you don't enjoy your job, you probably are missing some elements of autonomy, mastery, and or purpose. And yes, what you could do is just quit the job and start a business that hopefully gives you all these things. But in this video, I want to share some actionable advice that's not in the realm of you should just start your own business, that might help you incorporate a little bit more of these intrinsic motivation drivers into your work. The 3 paths to improving your job satisfaction. All right, so if we know that what we want to aim for is autonomy, mastery, and purpose, then there are basically 3 general parallel paths that we can follow to improve our job satisfaction. Firstly, we have the short-term path where you make tactical adjustments to improve your daily experience. Secondly, you have the long-term path where you are building this career capital that you can hopefully eventually cash in for more autonomy and mastery and purpose. And then thirdly, we have the exit path, which is that if you've tried the first 2 paths and you still find yourself dreading work, or you don't really want to try the first 2 paths, then we can try and design a thoughtful transition into something new. Now, I just need to flag that this video, like pretty much everything else that I make, is going to focus on things that are within your control. Of course, there are going to be things outside of your control that might contribute to you hating your job. It could be a toxic workplace culture. It could be that management is unsupportive. There are maybe systemic issues in your industry. There are economic pressures that limit your options. There are family responsibilities that constrain your choices. What you personally focus on is entirely up to you, obviously, but what I'm going to focus on in this video is the stuff that for a lot of people, not everyone, but for a lot of people, is going to be under your control. And I know there are going to be some people in the comments who find that offensive. There are going to be people who say, how dare this privileged neurotypical guy give me advice about how to improve my situation? He doesn't know my situation. My situation is uniquely tough and challenging. And you're right, I don't know your specific situation. This is a YouTube video, not a one-on-one life coach session with some kind of guru. But what I found is that even in the most constrained situations, there is usually something, even if it's something small, that we can control or influence. And so with all that said, please do feel free to take whatever is useful from the video, adapt it to your circumstances, and feel free to completely discard or ignore what doesn't apply. All right, path number 1, the short-term path. All right, so I had a conversation recently with a guy called Sahil Bloom, who has written the wonderful New York Times bestseller, The 5 Types of Wealth, which you should definitely check out. But in the conversation, we found ourselves talking about what would we say to people who hate their jobs?
I think saying you hate your job is a blanket statement that needs to be deconstructed. It is very rare that you hate 100% of your job. There are going to be components of it, people, specific actions, specific times of day, specific activities that you don't hate quite as much. You need to deconstruct your day. Break down the actual day, like from start to finish. What are you doing, and which parts of that are creating energy versus draining energy? Clearly, in the aggregate, if you hate it, it's draining your energy, and that's fine. That's a good insight. But figuring out the parts of it that are actually creating energy for you, or at least neutral, is a useful insight that you can take into whatever's next.
And that brings us to strategy number 1 for what to do if you hate your job, which is create an energy calendar.
It's the idea that at the end of each day, you go and look at your calendar and you color code the activities from the day according to whether they were energy creating, you mark them green, energy neutral, you mark them yellow, or energy draining, you mark them red. By the end of a week, you have a very clear perspective on the trends.
This is a very reasonable way of approaching the I hate my job, because you can then figure out what specific aspects of your job do you actually hate. And then what micro adjustments that might be within your control, what are the micro adjustments you can do to try and minimize the amount of red and like have a little bit more yellow and green in our calendar? Could you change the environment where you do certain tasks? Could you read my book, Feel Good Productivity, and find play, power, and people that make work more energizing and enjoyable? Could you have a discussion with your manager and say, hey, I'm finding this aspect of the job to be quite draining. I think I could add more value to to my role if I were to instead do X, Y, Z. Could you try and have that conversation? It's worth remembering with this strategy that it's pretty much impossible to make your calendar look entirely green. I'm an entrepreneur and I can do what I want, and my calendar is also not entirely green. But this gives us a very tangible, practical way to improve our situation in our job slowly over time by focusing on what gives us energy and trying to get more of that stuff in our job. Now, as we're talking about in this video, one of the key ways to enjoy your job a lot more is to become someone who is good at learning new things, to become a lifelong learner, which is where Brilliant comes in, who are very kindly sponsoring this video. If you haven't heard, Brilliant is a wonderful learning platform that I've been using for the last 5 years, and I absolutely love it. One of my issues with the modern education system is that we are taught to passively consume stuff as how we learn things. But actually, there are so many research studies that show that if you really want to learn something, you've got to learn by doing rather than just consuming. And that is where Brilliant really excels. They have a bunch of interactive lessons in maths, data analysis, programming, and AI. And the interactive nature of these lessons means that you are doing stuff rather than just consuming, and that is how you're learning. They've got a first principles approach to learning that helps you build understanding from the ground up, and it's all crafted by an award-winning team of teachers and researchers at cool places like MIT and Caltech and Google and Microsoft and many more places. Now, one thing I've personally been loving recently is their courses on AI. Obviously, AI is transforming absolutely everything about most people's professional lives. I've been using AI tools every day in my own workflow, but I never really understood how AI actually works until I started taking the courses on Brilliant. They've got a great course that helps you understand how large language models like ChatGPT actually work. And this sort of perspective is really helpful to be able to make the whole AI landscape feel a lot less overwhelming. If any of that sounds interesting and you would like to try everything that Brilliant has to offer completely free for a full 30 days, head over to brilliant.org/AliAbdaal or scan the QR code on screen or check out the link in the video description. And those links will also give you 20% off the annual premium subscription. So thank you, Brilliant, for sponsoring this video, and let's get back to it. Strategy number 2, energizing side projects. So there is a friend of mine who works in medicine, and she found working in medicine as a junior doctor in the UK to be quite draining. But there was one thing that she did, which is that she explored her curiosity. So she found that she was quite curious about how the computer hospital systems work, and why was it that the IT people didn't seem to understand what was really going on with the doctors. And so she went down into the basement where the IT people lived and decided during one of her lunch breaks to just have a chat to figure out how that system worked. And she realized that, she actually really enjoys this aspect of automated digital systems change. And so by kind of treating that as a little bit of a side project, she found way more fulfillment and energy in the day job. But secondly, she managed to craft her own role, where now she's doing part-time clinical work and also doing this digital transformation-y type stuff part-time as well. Now, this is a thing that's not advertised. This is an opportunity that she found by pursuing her curiosity and finding a little side project, and then pulling on the thread of that side project to eventually create a job that she loves. Now, in the research in psychology, where they've looked at what makes jobs enjoyable, there is this idea of job crafting. And the idea here is that in a lot of different workplaces, what you do, it does not actually have to be what is on your job description. I suspect you're not working on the assembly line in a factory with millions of other people where you have literally zero control over what's going on. I suspect you're probably in some kind of white collar job if you're anything like most people who watch this channel. And so there's probably reasonable opportunities to craft your own job even outside of your job description. Now, I've done a bunch of other videos on this channel that have more practical strategies that you can use in this short-term path to find more enjoyment from your day job. I'll link some of those down below, but now let's move on to the long-term path. And this is where you are trying to add so much value that you become irreplaceable. But before we continue, I need to go for a Muay Thai class, so I will see you very shortly. All right, back from my Muay Thai lesson, feeling a bit sweaty, but let's continue with the video. So we are now talking about the long-term path. And someone who perfectly illustrates this is actually a mentor of Sahil, and that is the CEO of Apple.
Tim Cook has been one of my mentors for a long time, and he didn't start his own business. He rose through the ranks at IBM over a long period of time and created a ton of value and was a fast rising star there. Then he went and joined a random computer upstart called Compaq, where Steve Jobs looked at his resume, thought he was interesting, and brought him in to work on things at Apple. There, he created a ton of value for everyone that he encountered and continued to rise up until he became CEO. And now today, he's a billionaire. Had nothing to do, like, he didn't start his own business. He didn't have some like massive new idea for some product or some new thing. Some of the richest people in the world worked their way up through other people's businesses. Paul Allen, right? Like there are people that have done this over long periods of time.
Obviously, Tim Cook, the billionaire CEO of Apple, is a extreme case. But I think the point here is very valid that you don't necessarily need to go off and start your own business. And as much as I'm in favor of everyone who wants to start a business to believe that they can do it and actually give it a go because it might succeed, I know there are plenty of people who follow this channel who don't necessarily want to start their own business.
For most people, the best path to building financial wealth is to create a ton of value at your job so that you are irreplaceable, so that people pull you into different opportunities, so that you rise up, so that you can continue to accelerate your path to income generation, but in a business, in someone else's business. You don't need to be an owner of that.
So the idea behind the long-term path here is that if you want to create career capital and you want to be able to cash in that career capital for autonomy, mastery, purpose, doing more interesting and energizing things, the goal is to become absolutely irreplaceable in your work, to add loads of value, and then over time you can cash in that value for the things that you want. So let's talk about the next strategy, which is to swallow the frog for your boss.
The single greatest piece of career advice I ever received is to swallow the frog for your boss. And I love that phrase because it's rather funny. And what it means is identify something that your boss hates doing, figure out how to do it, and then take it off their plate. And if you can do those three things, you immediately create value within your ecosystem. You immediately create value for your boss.
Now, obviously, this is not about becoming an office doormat or like doing it to the point where you feel exploited or whatever, but it is a very easy way of adding value if you're unsure how to do it. You could, for example, ask your boss or your manager, what are your least favorite tasks that I could take off your plate? What would it look like if I was twice as good at my job as I currently am? Another one might be, what would I have to do in the next 6 months to make you delighted to give me a £50,000 raise? And you don't have to do the things on the list, but at least it then gives you the information. It shows you what the map looks like. And if you're watching this and you have your own direct reports or you lead a team, imagine how great you would feel if someone on your team asked you that question. It's just that most people don't think in this way because I think we're sort of subconsciously trained that you should only do the things that you're being paid to do. Like, I shouldn't go above and beyond in my workplace and add more value because I'm not being paid for it just yet. It's not that first you get the raise and then you demonstrate increased value. It's that you demonstrate increased value over a long enough period of time. And now you've become irreplaceable to the point where you have way more leverage when it comes to campaigning for a raise or a promotion or a corner office or more flexibility or whatever the thing is. If that sounds weird, if that makes you think, no, that's not true, it's not true in my workplace, I really recommend reading the book So Good They Can't Ignore You by Cal Newport, where he cites a bunch of research that backs up this point. Strategy number 4. Become the person who figures it out. Now, there is a specific type of person that every team wants to have and that every company wants to keep. And this single reputation can accelerate your career faster than almost anything else. And it also means that you can cash this in exchange for flexibility or mastery or a new area of work or whatever you might want to do.
I think the easiest way to create value is to just become someone who has a reputation for figuring it out. Meaning, there's a whole lot of stuff early in your career that you're going to be handed that you have absolutely no idea how to do. Someone gives you something and your imposter syndrome bells start going off because you've never done it before and you start thinking that you're not capable of doing it. If you can build a reputation as being someone who can just figure those things out, i.e., do some research, ask a couple key questions, do the work, and get the job done, you will constantly be given new things.
I see this in my own team all the time. Like the people in my team who have the reputation for being able to just take anything and figure it out, those people are given way more opportunities beyond what's on their job description. And generally those are the more interesting things that we as a growing business are doing. If you have a reputation for being able to take something and figure it out, or like, figuring out how to use AI to enhance like the productivity of your work or your team, or like literally anything, it's so much effort for your workplace or your manager to try and hire someone else to do the thing. If they could give it to someone on their team who is able to figure stuff out, that's just adds way more value over the long term. Especially in the era of ChatGPT and Claude and all these other AI tools, it's increasingly possible to basically just figure anything out. And even if you don't actually end up solving the problem, the fact that you have demonstrated the ability to give it a go and like have shown you're working and have reported back to your manager or your boss about how you attempted to solve the problem, even that alone is going to make them feel as if you are irreplaceable, which makes you feel good because it's super nice when your boss likes you and values you, as you know, and it also builds the career capital that you can then cash in to hate your job a little bit less. Then we have the next strategy, which is to broaden your definition of compensation. Now, when most people think about what they are getting from their job in exchange for their hours worked, they often focus exclusively on the salary and the sort of surface level benefits. But often salary and benefits are not the things that make people love their jobs. Generally, the research around this shows that salary is a hygiene factor rather than a motivating factor. If the salary is bad, then it will demotivate you. But if the salary is really good, it does not actually serve as a form of motivation. Very few people say they love their work because of how much money they get paid for it. And so another way of getting more value from a job that we hate is to broaden our definition of compensation.
There's also the realization, by the way, that more people need to have, especially early in your career, that compensation is not about money. You can be compensated in the form of new opportunities. You can be compensated in the form of access. You can be compensated in the form of travel. You can be compensated in the form of networks. All of those things are compensation, and viewing compensation more broadly in those early years of your career is a cheat code.
So now you've put all this effort into becoming more and more irreplaceable, adding more and more value in your workplace. You're hopefully finding at this point that by adding value, you're actually not hating your job anymore because you're getting that mastery element, you're getting better at stuff, you're learning new skills, which feeds into intrinsic motivation. You're hopefully finding that as you add more and more value, you're also being given more autonomy because generally most workplaces, most managers, most non-toxic bosses are totally happy to give autonomy to someone who's doing a good job. You might even find that you get the glow of recognition. Like if you are someone that your boss absolutely loves, you are going to have a way better time at work in a non-weird way compared to someone who's, the boss kind of doesn't really like you, the boss kind of thinks you're a bit shit, it's like looking for any reason to replace you. That's a really, really stressful place to be.
Yeah, the idea is that there are going to be long periods of time when you are creating more value than you are receiving in return. And then there are probably going to be long periods of time when you are receiving more value than you create. And the idea is that over really long stretches of time, those two balance out. And it's sort of like if you have an upward line, you're going to be going above and below that line over long periods of time. But the hopeful point is that it's all going up in the aggregate.
But then once you've become the sort of person who adds all of this value and hopefully you're hating your job less, our next strategy is to dive through the cracked doors. Now, the idea here is that some of the most transformative career opportunities that can completely change the trajectory of your career and also help you enjoy your work way more, which is fundamentally what this video is about, those opportunities are often not presented to you on a silver platter. They tend to come in the form of a cracked door.
There are going to be opportunities in your career and in your life that present themselves as a tiny little crack in a door. And your sole responsibility is to figure out how to throw yourself headfirst through that door at that opportunity. I'll give you an example of that. These two young guys that were pitching me on wanting to run my TikTok account. They asked for a meeting. I said, I'm not really doing phone calls right now. Whatever, I was punting it. I wasn't that interested. Then they said, we're going to be in New York on Tuesday. Can you grab a coffee and just meet in person? I was going to be in New York on Tuesday, so I said, sure. They came up, we met, hit it off. They started working on my thing. Only later did I find out they had no plans to be in New York. I had said yes, and then they booked a flight to come and meet me and do that thing. Now, a year plus 2 years later, we're working together on a bunch of different things that actually have nothing to do with TikTok. But what they did was they identified a tiny crack in the door and they dove through it. They just jumped at an opportunity. And that is how you unlock those sort of nonlinear, asymmetric things in life. It's by keeping your eyes peeled for what those little cracks in the door might be, where you can just dive straight through it, where you can sort of just close your eyes and like push through and find what that unlock is going to be that leaps you to the next level.
Back when I was in medical school and working towards a residency in plastic surgery, I attended this conference where there were a bunch of plastic surgeons hanging out, and I was having lunch with a few of them, and one of them mentioned that they were part of this plastic surgery charity that kind of goes around the world doing reconstructive surgery on people in like low-income countries for free as like a charity thing. And then someone in the group asked like, oh, what's the website? Like, how can I find out more? And the surgeon mentioned casually that like, yeah, you know, our online presence really sucks. Our website's not very good. And immediately I recognized an opportunity because I knew how to make websites. And so I went up to that surgeon afterwards and I was like, hey, you know, I noticed that you mentioned that this plastic surgery charity website thing, you know, could do with some work. Any chance I can help with that? I've been designing websites for 10 years. I'm a medical student and I get what's going on. I understand the field of plastic surgery a little bit. I would love to help you with that. And then he was like, oh, wow, fantastic. That was a cracked door. It's not an opportunity that presents itself to random medical students being like, hey, we need a web designer for our plastic surgery charity. But it's like, you spot the opportunity, you dive through the cracked door, and it ends up morphing either into something amazing that can change your career or something that's just a bit of a cool experience. Now, if we think back to most workplaces have way more stuff to do than there are people to do them. And generally, the most interesting opportunities are not advertised as official job descriptions. And so the more you become this person who adds a lot of value and then finds these opportunities to, for example, travel or attend an interesting event with your boss, or there's this unexpected problem that comes up that needs some kind of solution, if you can like dive through that cracked door, you further cement your reputation as being someone who can figure stuff out, someone who's irreplaceable to the organization, and you end up enjoying your job a lot more as well. All right, so maybe you've tried a couple of these things and you still absolutely really freaking hate your job. You've done the energy calendar and you realize that there's nothing you can do to make the job feel more energizing and enjoyable. That brings us on to path number 3, which is the exit path. And my single biggest recommendation here would be to not quit your job to start a business. Instead, do the side hustle experiment. Can you try and start your first business or your first 2 or 3 businesses as a bit of a side hustle while you have a day job, so that over time, as you're tweaking your job so that it sucks a little bit less, can you be building up your own exit plan?
I think some people are very well suited to starting and building their own businesses. But I don't think everyone should go and start their own business. And maybe that's a hot take.
That's a hot take. Interesting.
I don't think every single person is set up to be an entrepreneur. Because entrepreneurship at the end of the day is waking up in the morning and being willing to chew glass over a long period of time and crawl through the mud on crappy problems. It's glamorized as like, oh, look at all these rich people that made all this money, but it's survivorship bias at the end of the day. You don't hear about all of the entrepreneurs that failed and then had to go and figure out how to scrap.
And if you're interested in my honest advice for someone who wants to start their first business, then you can check out that video over there, which will break it down in terms of like the 5 key myths that hold most people back and how to go about it if, for example, you have a day job. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you got value from this video and I will see you hopefully in the next one. Bye-bye.